gallery the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly, William Hay, MLA. The next item of business is questions to the First Minister. Question number 1, Johann Lamont.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Johann Lamont.
Thank you. The First Minister told the BBC's Today programme last week, and I quote, "We are going into talks with President Barroso and the European Commission." Can I ask the First Minister when those talks are going to take place?
First Minister.
Johann Lamont will have seen the European Commission's viewpoint, which states that they haven't expressed an opinion in terms of a specific situation regarding Scotland. So all the stuff we heard before Christmas, according to the European Commission, wasn't about Scotland at all. However, they did offer a route forward. They said that if the member state would want to ask for an opinion, then an opinion could be provided. We've made it clear to the UK Government that we could go jointly to the European Commission to find out with interest what the European Commission's view is, and then we can get that viewpoint. That seems to me an entirely reasonable suggestion, and perhaps Johann Lamont will depart from our colleagues in the coalition government and support the positive suggestion of the Scottish Government.
Johann Lamont.
I think we could work out that you didn't answer the question there, First Minister. If I can put aside what I'm asked and say about something else, might be an interesting thing to do. It's not what you're supposed to do in this chamber. Because, of course, you said you were going into talks with President Barroso. And since the First Minister made the assertion that he was going to meet President Barroso before the Deputy First Minister had even received a reply to her letter asking for talks, what was the basis upon which the First Minister said he was going into talks with the European Commission? Was it the same basis upon which he said he had legal advice when he hadn't? That is, he just made it up.
First Minister.
Well, I think that the basis was we asked for talks with the European Commission on what seemed to be the viewpoint that they stated in December, widely reported, which applied to the case of Scotland. The European Commission has now replied saying they said no such thing. They weren't talking about a specific case. However, I think it would be useful for the European Commission's viewpoint to be heard. I want to see their opinion, and that's why the Deputy First Minister has indicated that we'll go jointly with the UK Government, if they agree, to find out what the European Commission think. Of course, we've had, since December, some other important opinions on this matter. Sir David Edwards, the former judge at the European Court of Justice. Only this week, of course, Professor David Sheffer, who seemed to profoundly support, firstly, the Scottish Government's viewpoint that we've indicated many times, that we'll negotiate our position from within the European Union. And the case of David Sheffer pointing out that, in his opinion, there should be two successor states with equal status with regard to each other. Now, these profound and important legal opinions tend to give weight to the Scottish Government's point of view. I'm sure Johann Lamont has read them, understood them, and I'm sure she'll want to take account of them as we pursue this debate. It would be interesting, however, if Johann will give me a second, to have an indication from the Labour Party.
Order.
If they,
Order.
with their colleagues in the Tories, are heading towards the exit door of the European Union.
Johann Lamont.
Forgive me for not allowing the First Minister his soundbite before we moved on. Because, of course, although President Barroso hasn't spoken about the specific issue of Scotland, he has said that a new state, the treaties currently do not apply to a new state. And I can only assume that while the First Minister has trimmed on the monarchy, the currency, the regulation of the banks, he still does think that independent Scotland would be a new state. But you can correct me if I'm wrong in that regard. President Barroso, of course, has said he can't comment on Scotland's application to join the EU, but the Czech Foreign Minister has commented. The Czech Republic will, of course, have a veto on an independent Scotland's EU application. The Czech Foreign Minister, Karl Schwarzenberg, said Scotland would have to apply for membership. He went on to say Scotland would get a worse deal because, and I quote, a much smaller country with much less economic importance has less weight. Why do you think the Czech Foreign Minister is scaremongering like that?
First Minister.
Actually, Scotland is approximately the same geographical size as the Czech Republic. But incidentally, I've got the comments from the Czech Foreign Minister there. He was specifically asked, would they want to block Scotland's entry into the European Union? And he said no. So, even the Czech Foreign Minister, speaking before he realised the exit door to which UK is headed under Cameron's leadership, thought he wouldn't want to stop Scotland being a member of the European Union. If the Czech Foreign Minister doesn't want to stop Scotland being a member of the European Union, why do the Labour Party seem to cast some doubt in it? The events of the last 24 hours are very interesting in this debate, are they not? It indicates that the threat to Scotland's continued membership of the European Union doesn't come from this Parliament, this government or the people of Scotland. It comes from the banks of the Thames and a Tory coalition government who are heading towards the exit door and a Labour opposition who have still to clarify what on earth they think about it.
Johann Lamont.
I know that it's the First Minister's stock in trade to miss the point. However, what the Czech Minister is making the point about is not whether they would block Scotland, but what price they would extract for Scotland's membership of the United Kingdom. And the fact of the matter is, of course, that Alex Salmond and David Cameron are like peas in a pod. They will always put. Their party's interest before the interest of the people of this country. For there is nothing quite so negative as trying to mislead the country, and perhaps that's why support for independence is at its lowest since devolution. Perhaps the people who hear him say he has legal advice when he hasn't don't believe him anymore. Maybe the pensioner lying in a trolley in a freezing corridor doesn't believe him when he says he's doing a great job with the NHS. And maybe when he says he's doing everything he can to create jobs and then goes on a £500,000 trip to the Gulf, people don't believe him. Because the reality is, Alex Salmond cheered the Tories into Downing Street. Alex Salmond cheered the Tories into Downing Street. He sees Tory welfare cuts as an opportunity for his party. And he celebrates Tory mistakes on Europe. In fact, isn't it the case? He loves the Tories so much, he has taken Order! Let me try it again so you definitely hear it. In fact, is it the case he loves the Tories so much he has taken support for independence down to Tory levels of popularity?
First Minister.
I think Johann Lamont should try it many times again to try and get it right. I'm not the one who's in the Better Together campaign handing love with the Conservative Party. Now, amid all that fluff and nonsense, there was a serious point about the National Health Service. And let me make it clear that it's not acceptable in the National Health Service for a patient to wait 8 hours, less alone an 84-year-old man from Glasgow. But the National Health Service conducts 1.5 million accident and emergency admissions in a year. It's up about 6% over the last few years. And I've been looking back because not all of these admissions are conducted in the manner that we would like, and that is inevitable in an organisation, any human-led organisation. But you can measure whether National Health Service is improving or not. And the facts are that when we took office in September 2006, 90.3% of patients waited less than 4 hours in accident and emergency across the National Health Service. In September 2012, 95% of patients waited less than 4 hours. These are the facts of improvement in the National Health Service, which must be driven forward so we don't have any individual cases of 84-year-olds waiting 6 hours. I've dealt with Johann Lamont's alliance with the Conservative Party. Well, you know, if the Labour benches don't like it, then they shouldn't be hand in glove with a Better Together campaign. The point of the European Commission is not that they say they're not going to comment. They say they haven't commented on the Scottish situation, but allow the opportunity for the member state to go to find out the European Commission's opinion. I'd like to hear the European Commission's opinion, which is why the Deputy First Minister has indicated that we would be willing to do that in a joint submission. Unfortunately, Johann Lamont's allies in the Conservative Party don't seem, and Liberal Party for that matter, don't seem to have any enthusiasm. I wonder why. Is it because the proposition that comes forward from the Unionist parties that somehow energy-rich, fishing-rich, renewable-rich Scotland would not be welcomed with open arms into the European Union is absolutely incredible, and in contrast to the anti-European attitudes prevailing in the House of Commons, then many, many people across the continent would welcome a pro-European Scotland into the community of nations.
I'm calling Johann Lamont again because I expect any member in this chamber to be allowed to be heard when they ask their question. Johann Lamont.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I make just two very brief points? The SNP's position in Europe seems to have changed from, of course we would be a member, to why wouldn't we be a member? We need to have certainty. But on the question of the health service, it is not good enough for a First Minister to come here and say everything is fantastic, and for policy to shift and be driven by the fact that a newspaper and a journalist raised these questions. It's about time the First Minister got his Health Minister to make sure that this NHS was safe, rather than simply responding to scandal stories that have to come into the papers in order for there to be action.
First Minister.
Firstly, let the record show I never said anything of the sort. On the contrary, I pointed out that 1.5 million admissions to accident and emergency, then any human organisation, some people would not be treated as we would like. That is not acceptable. And I specifically made the point that it isn't acceptable for an old person to wait that length of time in a trolley in a Glasgow hospital or anywhere across the National Health Service. But of course the point that Johann Lamont didn't like is we can tell through the statistics the improvement in the National Health Service in accident and emergency. And if it was unacceptable now, as I say it is, for anybody to be in that position, wasn't it more unacceptable in 2006 when the Labour Party were in power and many thousands more people were in that position in the National Health Service? And a National Health Service that conducts itself and deals with 7 million treatments over the course of a year, 1.5 million in accident and emergency, should be seen as a health service and its workers performing in the interests of the nation. And one last point about accident and emergency. Thank goodness Ayr and Monkland accident emergencies are still open and not closed as the Labour Party would have done.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans, near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, despite the First Minister's protestations, there are many, many things on which there is clear blue water between us and Labour, not just on Europe. The difference is we are sound on Europe and they are not. We'd give Scotland a say and they wouldn't. And neither it would seem would the First Minister. And why is that? Why, when the research shows that twice as many Scots want a Euro referendum than want Scotland to leave the United Kingdom, why in his Scotland would he not give them their say?
First Minister.
Well, I'm delighted that there seems to be an implicit acceptance that the independence cause is going to win the referendum and put forward a position. The reason that the SNP advocate a position is we don't want to leave the European Union. So therefore we don't argue for a referendum on that case. But the Conservative Party's extraordinary position is that David Cameron says he wants to stay in the European Union. Indeed, when he's talking to other European leaders, he says he's the great reformer who's going to save Europe. But when he's running scared from his Eurosceptic backbenchers, he says it's an in-out referendum. And the interesting question is, after the negotiations, which are going to take 5 years, where is the urgency to have the Euro referendum that we used to have the Scottish referendum? If the negotiations fail, will the Conservative Party, will Ruth Davidson line up and campaign against the European Union? Or did David Cameron not bother to consult her when he made his speech yesterday?
Ruth Davidson.
The Prime Minister. Oh yeah, I saw it both this week and last. This week and last.
Order.
The difference is that the Prime Minister is ready to negotiate a better deal for the UK, and that Euro leaders like Angela Merkel are lining up to sit down with talks, and this First Minister can't get through the door in Brussels for a simple meeting. But I'm grateful to the First Minister because this week something has become crystal clear. Vote for the UK, you have a chance of your say in Europe, vote independence, and he's telling you to pipe down and leave it up to him. Going on yesterday's social attitude survey, we all know which way Scotland is going. We also know that this First Minister is old enough to have had his say on Europe decades ago, but no one in Scotland under 55 ever has.
Order.
No one under 55 in Scotland has ever had their say on Europe, and in this First Minister's world, they never will. So the First Minister needs to explain to them why he would deny them their say. Can he? Why doesn't he trust them?
Well, see if I can take Ruth Davidson through this. In her first question, she seemed to imply that she was at least admitting the possibility, perhaps even accepting that yes side was going to win the referendum. In her second question, she seems to have conceded the first elections for an independent Scottish Parliament. Because Ruth Davidson and her party, if they so wish, in May 2016, can go to the Scottish people on their platform of heading towards the exit door of the European Union. They can have exactly the same position as David Cameron has in 2015. But implied in the question is the acceptance that somehow Ruth Davidson has come to the conclusion that even under her dynamic leadership, the Conservative Party are not going to be threatening too many of the polling stations with victory in 2016. I think the circumstances of the last few days have fundamentally changed the independence debate in Scotland. The negative, scaremongering, better together, Labour, Tory, Tory-Labour campaign has rested on the assumption that uncertainty was going to be created in terms of Scotland's position in Europe. It is obvious to any reasonable person now that the uncertainty in Scotland's position in Europe comes from the Conservative Party, led by the nose from Eurosceptics, and the compromises that David Cameron has had to make to hold on to his job. I doubt very much if the Scottish situation, never mind the Scottish Conservative Party, were any part of the Prime Minister's calculations. That's why Scotland is safer with independence as a European nation.
A brief constituency supplementary from Hugh Henry.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Monday night, there was a major fire at a recycling plant in Johnston next to residential properties in the town centre. Some local residents were evacuated and rail services to Ayrshire were halted. Will the First Minister consider a review of legislation to ensure that these operations are not located in such public areas? And will he ask his Minister to come to Johnson to meet with me and relevant agencies to discuss a way forward?
First Minister.
Well, I'm certain that Keith Brown and the Deputy First Minister will be happy to arrange a meeting to discuss the matter further. And I would have thought that a discussion of the matter and understanding the circumstances would be the right way to proceed, and then to decide what action needs to be taken as a result of that meeting.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
The First Minister has been an advocate of the Scottish Parliament all his political life. I can understand why he might not want to give up on his ambition of an independent Scotland. But can he tell me, if Scotland votes no, whether he would engage with other parties on further powers for the Parliament? Nicola Sturgeon has urged us all to work together if Scotland votes yes. Will he work with us if Scotland votes no?
First Minister.
Well, of course, the extraordinary position of Willie Rennie, my certain memory on this is he was desperate to avoid devil max or federalism on the ballot paper in the referendum. Because I go into the referendum campaigning to win, as the Yes campaign does. That's how we see Scotland's future. I have absolutely no idea, with the Liberal Democrats' multi-faced alliances between the anti-European Tories and no further devolution Labour Party, where on earth the Liberal Democrats now stand.
Willie Rennie.
The First Minister knows the referendum is about whether Scotland stays as part of the UK or not. Even his own consultation rejected a second question. I don't quite understand why he's so shy about this. The Liberal Democrats have published our plans for Home Rule in a federal UK. Reform Scotland has produced Devo Plus, and the IPPR's Devo More is out tomorrow. There is a consensus emerging on more powers from all those plans, and it seems to be endorsed by members of the public. Will he at least consider working with me and others on a new constitutional future if Scotland votes no? His deputy wants partnership. That's reasonable. Why doesn't he?
First Minister.
Well, I do accept one thing. If you look at the social attitude survey, it shows a strong support for the Scottish Parliament increasing its powers. It also shows strong support for the Scottish Parliament to have full powers. And it also shows majority support for the Scottish Parliament controlling items such as social security, which I don't think have even featured in any of the Liberal Democrats' proposals. But I find this attitude surprising. The Liberal Democrats were extremely coy and reluctant to have a referendum at all at one point, and then to have anything else on the ballot paper. Now, apparently, we should revisit that in some way, or try to rearrange the furniture. I don't see how that is tenable. The Liberal Democrat Party wouldn't go into alliance with the SNP at one point because we wanted a referendum on independence. Now they're in alliance with the Conservative Party, who want a referendum on Europe. So, if the Liberal Democrats are willing to introduce the European principles because they have office in the House of Commons at the present moment, then I don't think that many people will regard them as the most reliable allies in terms of the Scottish self-government cause. So my proposition to Willie Rennie is, given that in the past, at least, Liberal Democrats have expressed the strongest support for Scotland having the strongest possible powers, why doesn't he desert the Europhobic Conservatives and the No Further Labour Party and come and join the Yes campaign? And then we can campaign jointly to take the Scottish people into a position of real self-government.
Question number 4, Bill Kidd.
First Minister, what the Scottish Government's position is on the recent report in the Scotsman newspaper that Scotland is receiving less than its population share of defence spending.
First Minister.
Well, the Freedom of Information on which the Scotsman article is based reports that between 2007-8 and 11-12, Scotland received £1.9 billion less than its population share of government spending on major EU-exempt projects. The Scottish Government's position that Scotland's interests best served under independence if this Parliament could take decisions on these matters, allowing our defence and shipbuilding industries to flourish. I noticed that was backed by Ian Godden, former chairman of the Defence Industry Leader ADS, who recently said in evidence to the Scottish Affairs Committee, quote, "Scotland can maintain its position in defence interests because there is an industrial and engineering capability that Scotland has got which makes it attractive."
Bill Kidd.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The First Minister will be aware that the MOD announced earlier this week that up to 5,000 job losses are expected as a result of further army redundancies. Can I ask the First Minister if the Scottish Government will raise this issue with the UK Government and seek clarity on how Scotland may be affected by these redundancies? And does he think that instead of wasting billions of pounds on the obscenity of nuclear weapons, this money would be better spent on maintaining the front line?
First Minister.
Yes, I do think that, and I think that the Conservative-led government, which has regarded defence as a major issue in the constitutional debate, should actually explain why people who have potentially been on the front line fighting in Afghanistan are going to come home for P45s under their formulation. Most people, most human beings would find that a disgraceful perspective under the Conservative Party. I also note, in terms of Trident, a correction in the Herald newspaper. It seems that the previous jobs estimates that were quoted are based on double and triple counting. So both in terms of the real redundancies in defence which are happening under the Conservative-led government and the waste of expenditure of billions on a system of mass destruction, I think it would be far better if these areas were under Scottish control.
Supplementary, briefly, Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware that the Scotsman report did not cover all MOD spending in Scotland, including the cost of extensive world-class protection for our oil and gas rigs in the North Sea. Can you tell me, if Scotland were to leave the UK, how this protection would be provided?
First Minister.
Well, by the Scottish Conventional Defence Forces, and the advantage would be we'd have conventional forces protecting Scotland's interests in partnership with our allies, as opposed to wasting billions on an unwanted, unusable system of weapons of mass destruction that the vast majority of Scottish MPs and the overwhelming majority of MSPs in this chamber have voted against. And I think Rhoda Grant, if she actually believes in this Parliament, believes even in the views which has been expressed by many people in the Labour Party, how on earth can she accept a situation of billions of expenditure wasted on Trident while conventional forces are being run down? And why can she possibly defend, in the system of public spending cuts that we see across the UK, these billions going into weapons of mass destruction? I think she should look to her conscience and come up with a different answer.
Question number 5, Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation report suggesting that a boy born in one of the most deprived 10% of areas has a life expectancy 14 years below that one born in the least deprived areas.
First Minister.
Yeah, I think both the report and the member makes a profound point. I think health inequalities are a huge priority and should be across this chamber. I would draw attention that there was within a report which makes some very serious reading for us all. One welcome piece of confirmation that the child poverty rate in Scotland had dropped 10 percentage points in the decade to 2011, from 31% to 21%. That is still far too high, but it does represent a significant measure of improvement.
Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is right that previous governments have been able to lift both the Scottish Government and the UK Government's working together a third of children out of poverty, and the current coalition government's policies make our task harder but are not excuses for despair. So does the First Minister agree with the JRF authors who were in Glasgow on Monday and were straightforward? Scottish ministers already have powers needed to make a real difference to health inequalities. The authors were clear. The poor can't and shouldn't have to wait for a referendum. So does he further agree that the young boy described by JRF and many like him, including in my city of Glasgow, need the Scottish Government's help now? Can we expect any change in the First Minister's policies or priorities as a result of this report, which recognise that some initiatives, particularly in public health, help the better off most?
First Minister.
The Deputy First Minister, I understand, spoke at the conference, and therefore we treat the report seriously and we treat the contents of the report seriously. However, I think Drew Smith is going to have to come to terms with what is an unavoidable fact. There is absolutely no question whatsoever, a major determinant of the immediate causes of poverty is what's available in the social security system. That system is run at Westminster at the present moment. As far as I know and understand, the Labour Party supports it being run from there. The report details the substantial threat to the incomes of families in Scotland from the changes that are going through in social security at the moment. Drew Smith is aware, or should be, of the measures that the Scottish Government, supported in this chamber, have taken to try and ameliorate some of the very worst effects of these social security changes. But wouldn't it be a fantastic position, instead of embarking on amelioration, we actually controlled these issues in Scotland and could decide and dictate on policies and try to turn back that threat to some of the poorest families in our land?
Briefly, Christina McKelvey.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Last week, the Child Poverty Action Group said the Westminster Government's policies, and let's not forget a welfare reform policy started by Labour, would result in a staggering 1 million more children being dragged below the poverty line by 2020. On a simple population share, that means 85,000 Scottish children pushed into poverty by a government we didn't vote for. Does the First Minister agree with me that the only way to protect those children is independence, and we really are not better together?
First Minister.
I agree that those in the Labour benches who bemoan and oppose and who say they're opposed to what's happening for Westminster Government should at some stage come to the conclusion, if they support Westminster Government having the power over these areas over Scotland, then they are implicated in the decision that that government takes to reduce people in Scotland to penury. There is no escaping the fact, if they want different policies in terms of social protection in Scotland, then they must, absolutely must, be controlled by this Parliament. So perhaps at some stage the Labour Party will catch up with the attitudes reflected in the Social Attitudes Survey and look and support social security coming under the province and power of this democratic Parliament in Scotland.
Question number 6, Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is probably aware that this is Cervical Cancer Awareness Week. What steps can the Government take regarding the education and awareness for cervical cancer?
First Minister.
Well, it's certainly correct, as Dennis Robertson indicates, that the earlier cancer is diagnosed, the better the chance of a complete cure. We know that screening is the best way to detect cervical cancer at its earliest stage, and every woman in Scotland between 20 and 60 is invited to be screened every 3 years. As well as information on screening, each invitation includes information on the signs and symptoms of the cancer. This week's Cervical Cancer Prevention Week. This is the week, and the message from this Government, and I'm sure for the whole Chamber, is that anyone experiencing these signs and symptoms should see their general practitioner straight away.
Dennis Robertson.
Yeah, thank the First Minister for that answer. I'm sure the First Minister would, with me, congratulate the Joe Cervical Trust and the awareness that they bring to women throughout the country. What coordination within the health boards can the First Minister ask for in terms of the awareness regarding, because there is a decline in the number of women actually attending screening?
First Minister.
I think that's an important point that Dennis Robertson raises. There's a 30 million Detect Cancer Early programme, and it obviously highlights the screening programmes available. We also work with NHS boards, including the responsibility for publicising screening within their local areas, and GPs play a pivotal role in highlighting the benefits of screening to their patients. Nationally, the information we provide for NHS Health Scotland is a key to allowing women to make an informed choice. But I'd be delighted to arrange a meeting with the Health Secretary and Dennis Robertson to take forward and to look in particular at these worrying indications that perhaps that information is not getting through to the fullest extent.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Before we move on to the next item of business, I will allow a short pause to allow members who are not participating in the next debate to leave the chamber and for the public gallery to clear before we move on to members' business. Could I ask the public gallery to clear quietly, please?